In the previous lessons, we've talked about different block and different inline elements, such as the images were inline, the paragraphs and headings were blocks, which just basically means that it starts on a new line. So here we've got an example of if you want to just set a default block element, we use div, and if we want to set a default inline element, we use span. And when we go over to refresh our page, we see what the difference here is. That the block ends here, so the div would start and end, and it starts on a new line automatically, as opposed to span, which actually doesn't start on a new line, but you can see that it does include the spacing between the different elements. And you can also use them within combinations here. So if we've got a bunch of, we can have a bunch of spans within those blocks or within those divs. You can see how that turns out within the coding, that it just shows up within there. And this is going to become really important when we start working with CSS, because we're going to see that these divs and these spans are going to be very commonly used to divide up different elements and create different elements within the HTML code, to break them up and to add additional styling and CSS to these different elements. Within HTML, we also have the ability to do formatting, and the formatting is inline. So now we've just added these strong tags around world, and what that's going to do is that's going to emphasize world. So you can also do EM and then the closing EM, and I believe I could do that this way. So opening and closing EMs, and then here we've got strong. So when we refresh this page, we see what's happened here, that EM has made this italic look to the text, and strong has essentially bolded it out. So you also have the option to do bold, but more commonly we're using strong. But bold is going to do essentially the same thing that strong does. So when we go back out and we refresh it, we see that they're both bolded there. It's important to be aware of these, but generally, again, depending on what your requirements are for the code, you might be using styling instead of adding in these different formatting elements within your HTML code. And again, you're always focusing on that readability factor, that you want your code to be readable, and when you do divide up the CSS, you take all of this out and divide it up within CSS, HTML, it's going to be a lot more readable code. But it is important to remember that these are there in case you do need to use them within your HTML documents.